Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we are going to be taking our first look at the standard best of one meta after the release of Aetherdrift. So it's still pretty early in. We usually start getting like a good sampling of stats after about a week to 2 weeks. Today's focus on the video is going to be newer decks or decks that existed that got some upgrades. Your stock mono red, mono black, rabbits, the omniscience combo, those are all still doing very well in the format. They're pretty much stock in what they were, so we're not going to cover it this week. What I want to do is just focus on some of the changes that might have occurred or just ways you can upgrade existing decks. So we'll kind of take a look through. I'm also going to cover some decks that aren't doing that well, just as a kind of warning, kind of heads up. If you want to spend your wild cards, you can spend them on it, but these are kind of what the stats are saying about these early decks to kind of give you a heads up before you start redeeming your wild cards. In that case, we got to save it there. I do apologize in advance if you hear a bit of a snowblower or snowplow. We got dumped in the last like 3 or 4 days, over 5 feet of snow here. All I've been doing is shoveling. I'm running out of space to put snow, so I can't escape it. Snowplows, snow is everywhere, so please bear with me as we kind of go through this. So kind of looking early, the metagame distribution is mono red at 12%, mono black at 10%. Then we have the Esper self bounce at 7, Boros auras at 4, the Red Aggro, which is just basically an auras deck with the fling, at about 3, and then kind of coming down we see rabbits and Dimir self bounce. So usually what happens is new set comes out beginning of the month. You see a large uptick in the various aggressive decks. This month is actually interesting because you saw mono black peak up to try to combat the mono red decks. I know as always, like I said, folks, we do get the stats from UntapkedGG in this case, companion tool that tracks your win rates and gives you a whole bunch of cool stats, in-game overlays. Link for Untapped is in the video description if you do want to use it. I'll paste all these deck lists that we're going to be covering now. So kind of jumping into it, Platinum to Mythic from February 11th when the set released to the 16th, so about 5 days, we had 270,000 games. I'm going to start off with just kind of listing some of the decks that aren't doing too well, and then we'll look at that. So is it discard, kind of draw, discard, looting effects, 51%. The monument decks usually are playing a little bit more control oriented. The roots decks with loot are not doing that well. There is a green, black, splash, white, and best of 3 that's doing pretty reasonable with Ketramos. Ketramos and the Molt Tender plays really nicely together. Boros Convoke can definitely win games, but I don't know if Hazard's actually that good to begin with in the deck. It's pretty slow in best of one to actually get going, but the deck's about 50%. Gruul Dinosaurs, not that great. There is a version of Azorius Artifacts that is doing pretty well that we'll cover. The Gruul Aggro deck's kind of knocked down. Mono Black Discard, not doing that well. Selesnya Control, Dimir Toxic. So these are all sub 50% decks. We have like Niv. We have more of the looting decks. Again, like Esper Self Bounce, 47%. Some sort of Boros control deck like Reanimator. Golgari midrange not doing too well. Temur Cauldron not doing too well. But that being the bad decks, let's look at some of the good decks. So Dimir Discard, one of the top decks before, got some upgrades. So 63% on this one here. We have Oil Deep Gearhulk. 4 mana, 4/4, lifelink ward. Really good stats into mono red, those creature decks. Enters the battlefield, you can look at target player. So you can also look at your own hand. So if you have a bunch of lands, you can target yourself. You can force that player to discard a card, they draw a card. So in your case, if you need to fix your hand, you can loot something away, or you can take the best card out of your opponent's hand. This is particularly good because you could sometimes run into the wrong half problem with these mid-range decks. You know, you got a bunch of go for the throats against the affinity deck, or cut downs versus, omniscience combos, stuff that's not going to work. You can kind of loot those away. You have the bounce elements with Fear of Isolation, This Town Ain't Big Enough, and then we got 2 new cards in the form of Grim Bauble, 1 mana, -2/2, and you can sacrifice it to Surveil. So basically between Grim Bauble and Momentum Breaker, this is a Start Your Engines card, mainly used for its actual removal ability. So it enters, opponent sacrifices creature or vehicle. If they can't, they discard a card. So this does have some text, even in the matchups where normally Tithing Blade wouldn't, where you could just use it as a 2 mana discard effect. Get Out is another way to bounce your cards back to hand, but this would be an iteration of the kind of bounce deck. Mono Red, 63%. Pretty stock list. They got rid of a Lightning Strike and a Witchstalker Frenzy, or actually a Screaming Nemesis and a Witchstalker Frenzy, and are playing Gastel Thrill Roller. So this card here is a 3-mana 4/2 trample haste vehicle that becomes a vehicle upon ETB, and then gets haste till end of turn. Well, sorry, it has haste, but it becomes a vehicle till end of turn. So you got to get that value where you don't have to worry about crewing it. It's a reasonable crew cost at 2, so pretty much all the creatures in your deck can crew it one way or another. And then it also has an ability to come back from your graveyard. So you could discard a card and you return it from the graveyard to the battlefield. It does come with a finality counter, so if it dies again, it doesn't just keep coming back over and over again. But this can help you in the late game if you're kind of flooding out. It gives you some utility there. The trample could be reasonable. And then just 1 Soulstone Sanctuary being added, trimming down the number of Rock-based Village. But otherwise, it's the mouse package, your burn package that you've seen before. In terms of Esper Self Bounce, you have 62% here. So similar kind of ideas. We see the Grim Bauble being added in here, as well as the Momentum Breaker. So 2 cards that can provide some more removal to the deck within Esper. It's going to be white cards for like Sheltered by Ghost. This one's got Shard Mage Rescue for protection. Optimistic Scavenger could put counters, and you have Nurturing Pixie as another way to kind of bounce the cards. Compared to the Dimir one, this one could be a little bit more aggressive. The Dimir one would probably be a little bit more mid-rangey control. We then go to Azorius Artifacts. So this deck here is playing a pseudo affinity deck, kind of archetype. So affinity is a very powerful old mechanic. We've seen it in historic, things like Thoughtcast being basically a 1-mana draw through to. We have Voyage Home as kind of an analog to that. So cost 7, but the 5 can be reduced based on the number of artifacts you control. And then you can basically be paying 2 mana to draw 3 cards and gain 3 life. You also have Memory Guardian as a way to have a 1-mana 3/4 flying. And then you have cheap artifacts. You have things like Duskro's Reliquary as removal, Ginger Brute. You have Nesting Bot as basically a creature that can trade, give you another body on the other side. You have Fabrication Foundry that can help you ramp into other artifacts. And then you can exile 1 or more artifacts you control, total mana value X, return an artifact with mana value X from your graveyard to the battlefield. So you can rebuy some of your effects. You have Murderkent Core Guidelight, so another Start Your Engines card. That's why Ginger Brute kind of plays well in the deck, because it can become evasive. Power is equal to the number of artifacts you control, but its max speed ability is actually really strong, because whenever you cast an artifact, you can pay 1 and just make a copy of it. Plays very nicely with stuff like Simulacrum Synthesizer, where you get multiple copies, and you can make very big constructs, so this is kind of the engine card of the deck, as well as Perleus Snare, where you're able to have this be a removal spell that you could, say, potentially copy. So for 4 mana, you exile 2 of your opponent's non-land permanents, and then you get 2 max speed potentials where you get to put counters on creatures you control. Temporary Lockdown is cheap removal. Notably, this does hit some of your stuff, which is a little counterintuitive because you have Duskro's Reliquary. So I'm not 100% sold on the Lockdown. It does help in the aggressive matchups, but you can play other cards in that case. Thran Spider in here, another way to just create some tapped Power Stones. They can give you some ramp as well. And then you have, I don't know what this card does. 4 mana, 2/4. When it or another artifact enters the battlefield in control, you may draw a card. If you do, discard. Put target card from your graveyard on the bottom of your library. Kind of a looter effect. This is another card that could probably be cut. Just play more Thran Spiders. Or you just get rid of Lockdown and this and play more Thran Spiders. You can also play more Duskro's Reliquaries. You can play things like Unsummon style effects, little things like that. Maraganda Raceway, basically if you have max speed, it's City of Traders, taps for 2 mana, Ancient Tomb, no damage. You have the Raceway, the Amonkhet Raceway, which can give creatures haste in the mana base as well. Mono Green Forest, Mono Green aggro-ish deck, a Mono Green deck in Standard. So this one here is kind of Lions Matter. You do have Fabled Passage, which seems kind of counterintuitive, but you are playing cards like Bristly Bill, as well as Mossborn Hydra, which care about Lion Drops hits, so this kind of triggers as 2. You also have Blossoming Tortoise, which can return these Fabled Passages. So you're kind of a rampy-ish deck. Line of Werewolves can ramp you. You have Protection and Snakeskin Veil. Flourishing Bloomkin scales as the game goes on with the number 4 so you have. Can also be used as a pseudo ramp effect. Awaken the Woods makes you a bunch of land drops. Plays really nicely with both the Bristly Bill and the Mossborn Hydra. Graveyard Hate with Keen Eye Curator. Similar flexibility with Frillback. Spring Bloom. Druid, sacks a land, finds you 2 basics, helps you ramp up. And then you have the Nissa on the top end. Very flexible with the minus against artifacts, enchantments. Pluses just makes you really big creatures. And depending on how many lines you come down, could just come down 7 mana, kind of Crater Hoof, overrun your board. A little bit lower on the win rate, but this one was cool. It's a 4-color Dino Reanimator deck. So with this deck here, you're using things like Bitter Reunion, Bitter Triumph, Consume with Evil. Just ways to put cards into your graveyard. Most notably, you're trying to put into play Galta. With Galta, you then reanimate with Rite of Moth, Zombify. Then you dump cards from your hand. So you can do like Gashoth, you can do Trumpeting Carnosaur, Polani's Hatcher, and a combo kill. Atali's a good hit. Even just Gashoth on its own can reveal a number of Dinosaur's creatures onto the battlefield. So you kind of go crazy like that. Virtue's another cheap removal spell. Not sure how reliable this is, notably because you can't actually hardcast your creatures other than like the Trumpeting Carnosaur and Atali since you're not playing Greenlands. But cool kind of concepts, big dumb dinos. Another kind of lower win rate, but kind of cool deck that could maybe be something built towards is Boros Cycling. I would say off the bat, you probably want another cheap piece of removal. Something like Push the Limit is going to be a little bit too expensive. So the kind of concept of this deck is draw, discard all your vehicles. So you have things like Skybox Fairy that you can cycle. You have Detention Chariot, so enters, exile target creature or opponent controls until this vehicle leaves. You could cycle it for 1. So just kind of cheap looting effects. The Valor Skyship, same idea. And then you'd push the limit. You return all the vehicles. They become creatures till the end of turn and they get haste. So you kind of kill them that way there. Day of Judgment, Brotherhood's End, the Sweeper. So you might be okay. You have Monument of Endurance that can help you ramp as well. So kind of a cool concept here. Reanimator, but a different type of with the vehicles. I would say maybe depending on how the meta is playing out, you may want to like play 1 or 2 of these fewer and then play like Torch the Tower or something like that just to have a cheap 1 mana answer. We then go to, this one is from King Adequates. They're 71 and 28 with a mono blue tempo deck. So notably, they are 4 and 3 against mono red, but they're doing reasonable against mono black and beating up on a lot of the other decks. So this deck here is playing at flash speed. You have a bunch of cheap bounce with like unsummons, into the Flood Maws, cheap counters, Spell Pierce, Phantom Interference. You have Protection and Dive Down. Flash threats like Spectral Sailor, Brineborn Cutthroat, Flood Pits Drowner, Malcolm. We have Venwit Zig Verbose. If I see that Aetherdrift commercial one more time with this stupid thing, I'm going to go crazy. 2 mana 0/4, start your engines. You have no max hand size. If you're to draw a card with max speed, you draw 2 instead. Enduring Curiosity draws you a bunch of cards. Tidebinder is a way to kind of stifle abilities. I would honestly not play River's Rebuke. It's too much mana. Just play like another Enduring Curiosity in place of this, I would say. Then we go to Grits. So this is an update on the green-white cage deck. So right off the bat, play 4 Collector's Cage. Don't play the Aether Spark. The Aether Spark doesn't actually do anything. The card's not that good. You should also be playing 4 Gearhulk in the deck. So those are 2 easy additions. So I will tweak that as I think it should be definitely 4 Gearhulk, definitely 4 Cage, but core of this deck, Gearhulk lets you tutor up 1 mana artifacts, creatures, or enchantments. So you can have a toolbox, things like Haywire Might, Dusk Rose, District Mascot, Authority of the Consuls, gives you some utility there. There's some banked versions of the deck that play Mockingbird that lets you copy the Gearhulk and kind of chain through that way. You can also play Pixie, which lets you kind of re-pick up some of your stuff. So there's some kind of value plays. There's definitely ways you can kind of modify. It is a toolbox deck, so you can put into the deck things that you think would be useful to tutor in certain situations. So kind of keep that in mind. And then lastly, so this is from Psychromancy. It is Mono Blue Mill Monument. They went 59% with about 100 games. And this deck here, kind of an interesting one. So you have Collector's Vault, which can draw, discard, create treasures for you. You have Monument of Endurance, which can create treasures for you. You can copy the monument with 3 steps ahead, draw, discard. You can mill your opponent out with Jace, with the Trithilian Mindbreaker, or a new card, River Churn Monument. So 1 mana to just mill 2 cards, but you can exhaust it, and any number of target players each mills cards equal to the number of cards in their graveyard. Cheap interaction with like Into the Floodmaw. Enigma Jewel basically means like Collector's Vault activates for free, Maze Mine activates for free, River Churn can activate for free, kind of gives you that value there. There's also like this town ain't big enough shenanigans that you can do, so you can reset your River Churn, you can exhaust and then bring it back to hand and get that value again. You also have access to Invasion of Arcavios, so you can find some situational stuff, weaving, stuff like that, Doppelgang with the treasures, Song of Tokuzan if you have a lot of mana, just kind of beat them that way there, World Soul Rage. So interesting kind of deck here from Sacromancy. That's it for the week. Let me know what you play. We'll be back next week with like the normal kind of production. We'll do all the lists, even if they're existing meta, but this one I just want to focus on more of the newer ones. Stay safe out there. We'll catch you next time.